And we're going to dive straight into it on the third revolution of the Rabbinic Reformation. So this is the third revolution of the Rabbinic Reformation. And last time we talked about the abolishment of sacrifices. This time we're going to talk about the abolishment of the three branches of government. Now, let's dive in. What do you mean by that?
And before we even do that, I just want to remind our listeners that the last time I said that there were, after the destruction of the temple, there were for a Jewish guy, there were two covenants to choose from: the covenant of the oral law and the covenant of Yeshua the Messiah. And I want to read you a quote just to close that subject, from a midrash called Tana Debi Eliyahu Zuta, portion B, and it says, "When the temple does not exist, the wise disciple in the yeshiva are the atonement for Israel." So when the temple does not exist, when we don't have the sacrificial system in the temple, like today, like for 2,000 years, who are the sacrifice? Who are the lamb? Who makes atonement? And the midrash says, the wise disciple, the rabbis themselves, the Talmidei Chachamim, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew, Talmidei Chachamim hem kapara Yisrael. So the wise disciples in the yeshiva are themselves the atonement. That's
putting a lot upon themselves, isn't it?
So it's either Yeshua, it's either Rabbi Yeshua, or Rabbi, other countless rabbis, again. But as you said, we're going to go to the third Reformation, or the third revolution, which has to do with the abolishment of the three of the separation of branches of government. And scholars of the Bible, of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Scriptures, they're saying that the Torah that was given by Moses brought an amazing revolution, which is the foundation of any democratic country today.
Right.
They say before the Torah, the ancient people that lived in the Near East, in the ancient Near East, they had a king, and the king was above the law. The king was the judge. The king was the legislator. He made the laws, and he would judge you according to the laws he made, and he was above the law himself.
Right.
Now God by Moses brought a revolutionary structure of government. He separated the branches. According to the Torah, there's only one legislator, only one lawgiver, once and for all, which is God.
Right.
Only God. So only God can make the law. And he gave the law by Moses. This is it. This would be like the U.S. Constitution. It's made now, right? It's a done deal. No changes, right? It's a given.
Yeah.
That's the Torah that was given by Moses. That is the laws are from God. That's one branch.
Right. You have like amendments inside the Constitution. Obviously, Constitution is written by man, so of course you're going to have amendments to something written by man. But it's quite difficult to change, and there's a lot of checks and balances so that people are not changing it willy-nilly. I mean, it takes a big deal to change or add an amendment to the Constitution. But you think about it. We have the Ten Commandments on the steps. Well, at least for now, we have the Ten Commandments on the steps of many of our courthouses, and it's kind of definitely seen as the building block of our democracy today. So explain how the Torah how did God give three branches of government for the ancient world and today?
So I'm quoting from a professor, an Israeli a Jewish professor Amnon Shapiro, and we can of course make his book available, although I think it's only in Hebrew. But Professor Amnon Shapiro and Professor Moshe Greenberg, they all saw that the Torah brought to the world the revolution of separation of branches. So we have God, the lawmaker, and then God tells Moses, you got to appoint judges. And the role of the judges is not to make new laws. The role of the judges is to judge according to the law given by God. So again, so right now we have separate at least two branches. We have the lawgiver, which is only God, all through the Bible. Not a single king ever legislate a new law.
Right.
Anywhere in the Bible. Only God gave the law. But God tells Moses, appoint judges. Now the judges has to judge according to the law given by God.
Right.
And there's Moses says not only judges but also police officers. So the police officers are to uphold the law. So if you break the law, who's going to bring you to court? The police officers are to bring you to court. So we have God, the legislator. We have the priests that were doing the sacrificial work, and some of them, other priests, were judges, and we have other judges that are not priests. But we have God, the priests as judges, and we have the police officers, the shotrim in Hebrew. Shotrim, shoter is a police officer.
Right. So you see that in Scripture. You see that there's the Levites that were supposed to be sent in every town to help judge small matters, but as things got too difficult, they would go further up the line of the courts. They would go all the way to the, we read in the New Testament, there was the Sanhedrin, which was the courts of its day.
Supreme Court, yeah.
That was like the Supreme Court of its day. And you even see temple guards in the time of King Joash and throughout the Scriptures as well.
And the biggest revolution that the Bible brought, that the Torah brought, is mentioned in Deuteronomy 17, in the 17th chapter, when God said to Moses, if Israel ever appoints a king, the king himself must be under the law. He's not above the law.
Yeah, he's supposed to write out his own copy of the Torah.
He's supposed to write out a copy, and he's supposed to be under the law. So if you cannot murder, the king cannot murder. If you cannot steal, the king is obligated to the same law. This is an amazing revolution compared to the ancient world, where the king was above the law. Outside of Israel, the kings of the pagan nations were above the law. They made the law. They were the judges, and they were above the law. They were not obligated to the same rule as the little people. Okay, and God says no way. We're doing a new thing. We're establishing what scholars say is the foundation of every democracy today. Separation of branches, complete separation of branches of government.
Now, inside of that, only Levites, only a certain line. God had his prescribed way. Again, we kind of see a little bit of a mirror of the sins of Jeroboam. That separation. Again, it's that theme through the Scriptures. Any problem, any sin, any struggle that we see today, you're going to find it in the Scriptures, because the same pattern, unfortunately, repeats over and over again. People go their own way, did what was right in their own eyes. And so tell us, what were these? How did they abolish? What did they change it into? Who's the judge and jury? Who's the lawgiver?
Now, the brilliance of the rabbinic system was the abolishment of this Torah revolution. So the rabbis did what scholars can call counter-revolution. They abolished the separation of branches, and now, and we see it in the Talmud, the rabbis themselves are making new laws. They legislate, they make new halakha, new takanot, new laws, and they are the judges. I can say in Hebrew they're poskei halakha and dayanim. So they make new law, and they are the judges according to the law that they themselves made. You understand? So they abolished in other words, they took the Jewish world back to the days before the Torah. So now the rabbis are the kings. And it actually says in the Talmud, who's the new king now? And the rabbi says, the rabbis are the new kings.
That's a self-appointed position there.
Exactly. So they're the kings, they are the judges, and they make the law.
Okay, let's get some real context. So there's a certain oven that needed renovating, and there is mention of this, and this was, I feel, is one of the most depressing Talmudic references I've ever heard, and it just grieves me to this day. Can you expound on the oven renovation and some of the revelations, quote unquote, that they had there?
So the Talmud gives the story of a person named Achnai, which had an oven. And the question was, after he rebuilt the oven, if is it, let's say in simple words, is it kosher or not? Is it pure or not? And the two sides of the debate were Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Eliezer. And the Talmud says that even though Rabbi Eliezer gave every supernatural evidence to make his case.
Yeah, what did he say? It was a few things.
If the wall of the house would break, if the water of the fountain would go back, if the tree would, and everything.
A voice from heaven.
Even a voice from heaven would, if I'm right.
And every time there was this voice or this supernatural thing happened, the rabbi said no.
And then Rabbi Joshua stood up on his legs and he said, "It's not in heaven anymore. It's not in heaven. We make the call.
Yeah,
we're the legislators. We're the judges. We're the new kings. The majority of rabbis agree on something. This is enough. So we're taking 3 branches and we're making them one. The voice of heaven, gone. He doesn't have a say anymore. He doesn't have a voice anymore. This is now, everything now has to do with intelligence, with the intelligence of men." Now, now again, because scholars see that the rabbis took a lot of their wisdom from the Greeks. Again, we see that in the Talmud, in the rabbinic sphere, women and slaves were out. They were not a part of the discussion in the yeshiva. They were not a part in the discussion of the law, as in Greece. In ancient Greece, even though Greece was a democracy, the slaves and women were out. They were not in the game. They were out of the game. And we see it again when the rabbinic party took over. Women were out. Slaves were out.
That's actually still today. You look at our culture here, and you have a fight between. There's a group called the Women at the Wall, and the rest of the Orthodox, and they're seen as traitors and heretics of sorts. It's really a vicious battle for women to have any religious, ceremonial, anything or influence. There's a few women rabbis, you could say, but it's controversial.
And this thing about the women of the wall, what do they want? They want to carry a Torah scroll into the women's court in the temple, in the wall, in the Wailing Wall. That's all they want to do.
And they can't do that.
And they can't do that. Because it's controlled by men. It's a man's sphere. This is the only thing they want. So they want to practice Rabbinic Judaism. This is mostly Orthodox women or conservative women that wants to practice Rabbinic Judaism, and they're not allowed because they're women.
But again, the main point here is the authority was stripped away from God himself, actually. If God speaks from heaven, if God shows up in miracles and signs and wonders to really make clear his way, and in a way, is that part of some of the struggle that we have in sharing the gospel?
Now, I'm going to tell you a story that if it wasn't written in the Talmud, you wouldn't have believed me. You would have thought I made it up. I'm going to tell you a story from the Talmud. And if it wasn't written there...
We'll give a reference, too, in the comments.
And we'll give a reference later. But there was the rabbis believe that in heaven there's the yeshiva. How would you say yeshiva in English for people?
Yeshiva, you could say, is almost like a Bible college or
but a rabbinic.
But it's rabbinic, and in a yeshiva, unlike a Bible college, you come and you go. After you've served your time, a yeshiva is constant all the time.
So in heaven,
cradle to grave.
In heaven, there's the Yeshiva of God, where he learns Torah, because God, according to the Talmud, learns the Talmud. So there's the Yeshiva of God, and there's the Yeshiva of the saints of the rabbis.
Do you see how intellectually busted that first... you said, God learns. First of all, can you just comprehend, first of all, the error of that statement and how first of all, prideful it is. But second of all, how in error of God's character and who he is as God, capital G-O-D.
Remember, in order to elevate themselves, They had to lower God into their position. So now God is a wise disciple like themselves which study Torahs. So listen. God has a yeshiva in heaven where he studies Torah, and there's the opposing yeshiva of the saints of the rabbis which are in heaven. They had a dispute about some injury that has to do with blood or a leprosy. They had a dispute about some kind of injury, okay? In heaven. And they couldn't, the Yeshiva of God said one thing, and the Yeshiva of the saints of the rabbis in heaven said the opposite. And they couldn't come to agreement. Who's right? Remember, they're arguing with God. The Yeshiva of God is arguing with the Yeshiva of the saints of the rabbis about a certain wound or injury that has to do with blood or leprosy, and they cannot decide who's right. God says one thing, and they say, you know what they did? They reached a draw. We don't know who win. So what they did, they called up to heaven a rabbi which is an expert in these kind of legal matters.
Yikes.
They raised him up. They raised him up to heaven. They killed him on earth, so he could raise up in heaven and dispute the matter. Because God says one thing, the yeshiva of the rabbis in heaven say the other. So they had to bring up to heaven an expert rabbi, and you know what he said? What did he rule? He ruled in favor of God. Of God. But
he ruled.
No, but you're right that you're laughing, because you know what happened 1,000 years later? The Rambam, which one of the biggest names in Rabbinic Judaism, Rambam, who lived in the 11th century, the Rambam brought himself back to this discussion, and he said, you know what? I think this rabbi was wrong, and the yeshiva of the saints were right. So this rabbi supporting God's decision was wrong. Excuse me.
Who was killed to bring up to heaven to decide between God and man.
And he decided in favor of God, but he was wrong. The Rambam says, when I look at the evidence now, I see he was wrong. Actually, the saints in heaven, the saints in the yeshiva in heaven were right, and God was wrong.
Look at this thread again, though. This is again. Let's bring it home. Let's bring it back to practical application. We have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, original sin, the separation that first cut off our fellowship with God, that brought chaos into this world. What was it based upon? My control of the knowledge of good and evil. I'm the one who decides. I'm the one who judges. Not you anymore, God. And Eve took the fruit. She ate of it. And she started judging for herself. Did she judge wisely? No. Did Adam judge wisely? No.
Can I stop you right there? Because again, there is a midrash, and if it wasn't written, you wouldn't have believed me. But there's a midrash who says the tree of knowledge represents the oral law. So just imagine.
Okay. You know what? Like, how much more on the nose could you be about deception? If you say the tree that separates us from God is the oral law, and see here's what's happening too. You would almost think that it's a nefarious plot, but it's not. Here's the thing I found: if you take the center of it as not Yeshua, not Yeshua, and that's really what it became after the destruction. After Yeshua was raised from the dead, and it really became that opposing sect said, it can't be Yeshua. We reject that. And what do you have? The opposite of it. Because even though they don't quite study Torah as in the actual scriptures that we have in our, when they say study Torah, they're talking about the oral Torah, the Gemara, and mostly the oral Torah. With that rejection comes taking in my own hands control, taking in my own hands judgment. And you take that with the accurate, the word of God is sharper than a two-edged sword, dividing It goes straight to the truth, straight to the truth. And when you look through that lens and you start with, my compass point is not Yeshua. It can't be him. It's not the Messiah. It's something else. Then the truth will come out in such a pointed and accurate way about yourself, because the Torah is like a looking glass. You look into it and you see what sort of man you are. And I think, first of all, I think if you're listening to this and you're hearing this, if your heart isn't moved with compassion, exactly. If your heart isn't moved to open up the eyes of the blind, if your heart isn't moved, if you have anger in your heart, well, it definitely shouldn't be. It should be compassion for the Jewish people, compassion for those who have just listened blindly for thousands of years now. And that's part of our mandate. That's part of what the passion that drives us is for our brothers and sisters to see the truth. The blinders would be taken off, and that's happening right now in our day.
So listen. So identifying the oral law with the tree of knowledge, just so you'll understand what it means. It means that zealous, honest Jews, the one who worship God, as we speak today, are studying the oral law, studying the Talmud, which means they're still eating from the tree of knowledge. And you know what's the consequences of eating from the tree of knowledge? What shall happen to you if you eat from the tree of knowledge?
You lose. You're deceived. You're separated.
It's choosing death.
Yeah, it's death.
Yeah, and the rabbinic literature itself identified the oral law with the tree of knowledge.
That's why we have to be discerning today. We have to be discerning, not just our Jewish brothers that are listening and kind of finding your journey in this, but even for the church, even for the ones who follow Yeshua, we still have that temptation today. We still have that draw that would pull us away to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We still have that, I want to take it myself. I want power.
And the tree of life is available. The tree of life is available for everyone. But still, we prefer, our ego, our flesh prefers to go to the tree of knowledge.
So you know what? And to wrap it up, I want to say, this is some really amazing revelations, especially with looking at the three branches of government that God established through his Torah, the perfect law, the law that all good democracies try to base it on. And even, like I said, in America, the Constitution is not infallible. It has been written by man, but God's Torah was written with his own hand. And that's something no other religion, no other people can take hold of and take claim to. This was unique in all the earth.
And Professor Amnon Shapiro in his book is saying that what the rabbis did is abolish this wonderful revolution of separation of branches of government, abolished it and making themselves as the king, as the priests, as the judges, as the legislators. He even brings example from the Talmud for rabbis that judged, the courts were in their houses. They judged from their houses, and they had privilege that nobody else did, like the kings in ancient Far East. Before the revolution of the Torah, when the king is above the law, the rabbis put themselves above the law. And Professor Amnon Shapiro is describing this in his book. Although how radical it is, but that's the historical truth.
Well, I think that's some really good stuff to chew on. And again, we know that we have one King, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, who is God above all, the lawmaker, the lawgiver, the one who is the only judge, and who has appointed for us a perfect Torah, a perfect law for us to look into, to examine ourselves, to judge righteously. And I'm so thankful for that, so thankful to be in the revelation of truth there. And thank you, Dr. Broshi. And it's all the time we have for today, man. I can't wait to get into the philosophical revolution, which is the fourth Rabbinic Reformation revolution that you're going to talk about. So this is really, really interesting. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to next week. God bless.